yesterday we saw that you start creating arrays using the new operator, okay? When you create an array, you declare the data type, you declare the name of the array, and you declare the size of the array. However, that size is optional at the time you create it. You can create arrays that have no size, which essentially means they take up no memory, and then later allocate size to those things, okay? Now there's also another option with arrays. You can also create arrays that have an initial set of values in them as well. So we're going to try this in our example right now. But before we do, I just wanted to show you in the notes, this is shown in here as well. So here you can see I'm creating an array of doubles, and I'm assigning spot 3 or index location 3 to be the number 301, okay? Which happens to be my old classroom number back in my old school, okay? And then I output that spot. Now again, we did that basically in the example as well, okay? So we are assigning the number 301 to array index subscript 3, okay? Also note again, what we noticed yesterday, that arrays use the square brackets, not the round brackets, because the round brackets are reserved for methods. Okay. So let's stop for a second, jump back to our example, and let's create another array. This time I want you to make another int array. We'll call array2. Now, here I want to point out something before we go any further. The square brackets that you can put on an array can happen right here, attached to the name of the array, or they can go here, attached to the data type. And I'm actually going to open this question up to the grade 12s as well. Out of these two types, which are both available in Java, which would you think I prefer? And why would I prefer one over the other? What do you think, Zuhar? The first one or the second one? You got a 50-50 shot. I'd actually suggest that you'd use this one. And the reason is it will transfer to other languages a little better, okay? Especially more modern languages, okay? By putting it here. So although you have the option of doing either, this I would say is a better style. So if you get in the habit of doing it that way, I would suggest that you do that. Although I wanted to put both in our example just so you know that both are available. Okay, so there we go. There's array2. And this time we're not going to say equals new integer. Instead, what we're now going to do is we're going to put the curly brackets, and inside the curly brackets, you can put, whoops, you can put the values separated by commas. What this does is it also creates an array. But what it does when it creates this array is it automatically assigns its values. So this will be created inside the computer. It'll automatically index it. It'll automatically know its length. It will be creating a length 5 array, or sorry, length 6 array from 0 to 5, and it will fill its contents, okay? So using those curly brackets, this is another option for creating arrays if you know what's going to go in the array. You often don't know what's going to go in the array, but this would be an instance where you do know what's going inside. What's this sequence? Anyone know? Anyone recognize what that sequence of numbers is? It's not a random sequence that I made. Yeah, I know you know, Jason, but that's cheating. Anyone know? Don't overthink it. Don't think mathematically. You'll get it wrong. You'll be performing something called confirmation bias. The coins, that's right. Those are the Canadian coins. Actually, one of them no longer exists. Do you know which one? The penny. That's right. Boy, you guys, now you're on the ball. All right. So yeah, that was the Canadian coins. I did that in honor of our history guests today. All right. So now we've created our second type of array, okay? So that array is built, it allocates the memory, and it assigns value to it at the same time, okay? So this is available in the notes. I also in the notes talk about how when you first build an array using the new operator, that its contents are unknown. Now, NetBeans and Java will automatically zero index an int array. What will be inside of an array of doubles if you create it, and if Java takes care of it for you? I'll give you the answer. It's also zeros. What do you think would be inside of an array of strings? Yeah, the blank string, like the empty quotes. What would you think would be inside an array of booleans? Falses, right, that's right. Okay? So it is kind of intuitive, but never make that assumption, okay? Okay, sound effects today. Now, as you can see in this example, it is possible, we're not going to do this in our code, to build an array with no initial size. Then you could have code and then create the size later. But here's the thing. Every time you assign an array a new size, and you could continue to make it a new size, it wipes out the contents. So you can't use code like this to make an array keep growing in size. So maybe start it at size 1, and then later make it size 2 and size 3. Because if every time you use the new operator, it'll wipe out any contents inside that array. Okay? So what you want to do is always assign an array an initial value or initial size so that it doesn't run into that error. Okay? And you can see that these kinds of errors will appear in Java. We're not going to do this, so I'm just going to encourage you not to use lines of code like that. That's similar to when I say don't make an integer called x without giving it an initial value. Don't just make variables without giving them or initializing that variable. Okay. This I just showed you how you can use the curly brackets and the commas to build up arrays of values, okay? So if I would have called it coins, you would have got the hint on that last one, okay? And if you want to be really lazy, you can actually create multiple arrays on one line of code. So here I say int a equals new int 10, comma b equals new int 20. Now here is where you take the advantage of having the curly brackets on the data type, because if you had them on here, you'd have to put them there, and that's 2 extra keys to type, and we're lazy and we don't want to do that, right? And again, you could put a comma and just keep making more and more and more arrays if you wanted to, okay? Again, it's just an option. You don't have to do it. I don't particularly use this kind of coding myself, generally. I like to declare each one on its own line, but I'm not going to take marks off or anything like that for you doing that. The style of coding you pick is yours to own it, okay? As well, if you be even super lazy, you can even create initialized arrays on one line of code. Now, because this would have been so long, I just put a line break in there. But here I say, here's a string array called names and all its values, comma, cats and all its values, okay? And here I show that if you do put the round brackets on the variable name, you'd have to do it twice. If I put them after string, I would have only had to do it once. Okay, so now we've got these arrays. We're going to use them, okay? So as you've already seen, you can use the array by accessing its subscript or its index value, okay? But that's not the only place we're going to need arrays, okay? What if I want to spit out this entire array? What if I want to print out the whole thing? Well, I could use a line of code like this, and don't type this, but let's just say I did this. And I say spit out array2 spot 0, and I have 6 spots, spot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I went and changed all these numbers. That would work, hopefully. I'm just going to run it to show. And hopefully that should spit out 1, 5, 10, 25, 100, 200. It will also spit out the 333 because we still have that code in there. But again, this seems inefficient. This seems like I might as well have gone back to originally and it worked, but it seems like I should have just gone back to my original variables. What's the point of an array here? What's the advantage? Well, imagine this kept going. went like 400, 500. Let's say this array was not 6 spots long, but 600 spots long. Like this, it was a huge array. I would need 600 lines of code to print out the whole thing. But this is, again, where the advantage of the array comes in. And I'm going to actually see if any of you remember from the extras unit last year. What structure do you know, what coding structure can be used to travel through an entire array? The for loop, that's right. That's actually what the for loop is specifically built for. It's built to travel through arrays. So let's do that. Let's use a for loop, okay? And the for loop will go from 0. And that's why, by the way, for loops automatically start at 0, because that matches arrays. But right here, also, that's another good reason why they use I in a for loop, to stand for index as it's traveling through the array. But it's not 10. It's the size of this thing, right? And what is the size of that thing? 6, right? So let's put a 6 there. And let's put the output line. So system out. And we'll print what's in array 2. But what do I put right there? What goes right there inside the square brackets? I can't put a 0, because then it'll just spit out spot 0 6 times. Right. That's where I put my variable I. So now it doesn't matter how big the array is. I can use 3 lines of code to travel through the whole array. Even if this array was 3,000 elements, like right now it's only 6, but if it was like 6,000 elements, I wouldn't need to change this. This would still work. And there the advantage of the array starts taking over, that I can loop through the whole thing no matter how big it is or how small it is. It'll always travel through the entire array. Okay? This is in my notes as well, that it talks about how you can use a loop, specifically the for loop, to travel through arrays. Okay? And another nice feature, which we're about to look at, is arrays have a little built-in feature that makes this even easier. We're going to go back and I'm going to show that right now. So now this will work, because this says 6. But what if I happen to add another number to this? The loop won't crash, because it will still only go to 6, but it will skip this last thing. When I run this, it won't print out that 500. I would have to then change this to 7. And that seems like a pain that I'd always have to change code. So what you don't want to do is do that. Instead of putting a 6 right there, which locks it into a set number, instead, what you use is the name of the array that you're looping through. So that's array 2, the name of that array. But then you put dots, and built into every array is a feature called the length. So you just put dot length. And basically, by putting dot length, it will automatically remember what size it is, because it's built right into the memory of it. And that's a handy feature. So now by doing that, I can keep adding stuff up here, and it won't matter. My loop will still work. Okay? So notice now, with that 500 added, I can run this, and it'll loop to 500. I can take the 500 off, don't change the loop, and it still works now through that. So the looping structure with the for loop is built to work really well with arrays and to use that dot length feature, which makes it really handy. Okay? Now, again, we talked about this yesterday. Keep in mind that the size of an array is not the same as the last element number of the array. Because it starts at 0, an array of size 5 will be number 0 to 4. This is the most common error programmers will hit when working with arrays, is they will always kind of miss that. Okay? So here's a piece of code in the notes that loops through an array called dec, which is going to hold 52 integers. Okay? So I go from 0 to dec.length. Now, again, you think, well, the length of it is 52. How come it's not crashing when it gets to spot 52? Well, notice how the for loop says less than. It doesn't say less than or equal to, which means it never actually reaches spot 52. it goes to one less than that, spot 51, which will match exactly what's going on here, okay? So again, when you put a 52 there, that means create 52 spots, which means 0 to 51, okay? And then what I do is I just put a random number in there, and it will work, okay? Now, length is not a method, okay? So be careful about that. You don't put round brackets there. It would seem kind of like it is, but it's actually not. It's not a method, okay? And then, so you got to be careful again about these brackets and things like that. Now that you've learned methods and now that we're learning arrays, to kind of keep everything straight here. Okay, so as I said before, the error you're going to encounter with arrays is a range error, which means you shoot out of bounds. Here's an example of that. I create an array of size 5, which means 0 to 4. Then I try to print out spot 5. Well, there is no spot 5 because it goes 0 to 4. That doesn't exist. It's also like trying to spit out spot -1, which will also never exist because arrays always start at 0. So those are outside the bounds or the range of that array, okay? So you'll get a specific error that NetBeans will try to help with you. I'm going to actually try to replicate that right now. Please, you guys don't need to do this. But let's say I tried to spit out, okay, so this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I tried to spit out spot 6 or even spot 60, that spot does not exist in the array, okay? It goes beyond the range. So if I run this, you're going to see down here, it's going to say exception. Exception means error in main, and it actually kind of tells you what the error is. Out of bounds exception. So it's actually trying to help you here. It's telling you that it went out of bounds, okay? As well, you can click on the line and it'll show you which line caused the error, which was that line. So NetBeans tries to help when you have an error, okay? Sometimes it's very helpful, sometimes not so much. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to tie together our previous unit, methods, with our current unit, arrays. And we'll do this through example. So rather than use this loop right here, what I want everyone to do right now is take that loop and cut it so you don't have to retype it. Cut it using Control-C. Okay. Now, what I want you to do is write this. Output array 2. Now, this will be a method. Output. Doesn't exist yet. We're about to make it exist. But this is a method that will spit out our array. So you can use the light bulb to create the method. Okay, so now hopefully it has created a little method for you, and that's when you can paste in that loop. And what I'm going to actually suggest is rather than call it array 2, I'm going to go through and actually change it just back to the word array. Because now what we have here is we have a method that takes an array as a parameter, and you are absolutely allowed to do that. Arrays can be parameters. As well, you can pass an array as a, what's the word for that? Right there. Not a parameter, but a argument. That's right, an argument. So the argument can be passed into the parameter. So arrays are useful that way. They can be used as inputs into methods. And that's handy, okay? Because now it can input any generic type integer array. So up here, I can also call outputs on array 1. So I can output the second array, and I can output the first array. So let me just get rid of that line. Well, no, I'll leave that line. And now when I run it, notice what's happening here. Here's where it outputted the first array, 1 to 200, right there, okay? And then down here, it outputted the second array. Notice the second array was full of zeros, except for one spot which holds the number 300. Okay, any red lights? Anyone? I'm going too fast. Okay, so the first thing you know about arrays is they can be passed as parameters to methods. My apologies. Okay? The second thing you need to know about arrays is they can be returned from methods. So here's where I'm going to show that. Up here in main, I want you to say array, actually we'll do the third array, int array3 equals, and what we're going to do is we're going to make a method right here called create random array. Now, with this method, I'm going to provide it with a parameter. The parameter will be the size of the array. So how big should we make? Let's make this array size 20. Okay? So what it's going to do is if this thing works, which it doesn't yet, obviously, but if this little method we're going to build works, it's going to take that 20 and it's going to align up 20 array spots. Okay, so from 0 to 19, it's going to build that inside the method. It's then going to fill it up with random numbers. It's going to fill it with random numbers. And then it's going to return that array so that it gets locked into that one. So it's a way that we could sort of do a couple things at once. Because here I pass the array to the method, and here I'm going to actually return the array. Okay? So again, knowing what you guys know about methods, now that you're a little more comfortable with them, you know that arrays can return things. You didn't know that they could return entire arrays, but now you do. And you also know that NetBeans can help with this process. So if you use the light bulb, it will create this method called random array down here. And we can start filling in the blanks for what this method does. Okay? Notice right away that this array, or sorry, this method returns type int array. So right there it tells you that this thing is returning an integer array. It has one parameter. It had no idea what that thing was that you sent it. It called it I because it had no other good name for it. But we're going to rename that right now. We're going to rename that size because that's what that is. It's the size of the array. Okay, so let's start making up this method. Okay, first thing is let's make an int array equal to a new int, and it will pass the size. Okay, at the end of this method, we will return that array. So right now, it will create an array, and it will send it back, which is good. But in the middle, we want to fill it up with content. We want this array to be filled with random numbers. Okay, well, let's make that happen. Okay? Let's make this array get filled up with random numbers. So here again, we can use our for loop to travel the array. Go through array.length. Or we could have put the word size right there because it would have meant the same thing. Okay? And as a matter of, well, no, let's leave it as array.length. So now we're going to go through every single spot in the array. We're going to go to array spot I, and we need to give it a random number. So let's make a little method to do that. Random integer. We've done this method before. But when you create a random number, you need a high value and a low value. Okay? So what should our random numbers be? I mean, we could pick anything we want. We could pick random numbers between 1 and 10 if we wanted to. But let's say we had an array of size 1,000,000. There's going to be lots of 1s and 10s then in there. So can you guys suggest two better numbers for high and low in this case? Remember, we're inside of a generic method. We don't know how big the array potentially could be. Daniel, what do you think? Yeah, or 0 or size would be a good idea. Yeah, because size is the parameter. But I'm actually going to go one more. That will possibly, like let's say it's size 10. So it says give me a random number between 1 and 10. And let's say it picks a 7. there's a good chance that it's going to repeat. So I actually think 0 is not the best choice as the low number. What I would suggest is this. The negative size. Who said we couldn't use negative numbers? Let's make negative numbers. So if I give it a 10, it'll make a random number between negative 10 and positive 10. It's still going to possibly create duplicates. That's not a big deal. But at least there's a lesser probability of that happening. Okay, now let's create this method, random integer. We've done this one before. Rename these two parameters as low and high. This is where we'll wrap up today. Okay? Just want to quickly fill in the blank on this one. You may have this in your notes from the previous unit, but basically it is a several part formula. You start with a double for the seed value, and you get that from math.random. You also need a double for the low number, and to do that you cast the parameter low as a double. You do the same thing with high, the high value. The actual random number equals the formula high minus low plus 1 times the seed value plus the low. That's the formula for the random number. Okay? And then finally you return that, but now it has to turn into an integer, so I cast random as an integer. So I cast that at the end. Now these 5 lines of code can easily be factored into one line if you want, but then it becomes a little more hard to read. So I usually like to make it at least about 3 or 4 lines of code, just so it kind of explains what's going on there a little bit. So that will generate the random number between low and high. And again, you probably have this method done. But if you don't, there it is again. So then finally today, let's just add one more line. I'll zip back here in one sec just to see if you guys can wrap it up. Now that we've created array 3, let's output array 3. And it'll be random numbers in there, hopefully. It'll have a bunch of random numbers in there, and it'll be created of size 20. So I'm just going to try and run that. And there it is. There are 20 random numbers in there between negative 20 and positive 20, all placed in an array. Okay, and we'll stop there for today.